The common belief is that the stock market crash caused the Great Depression, but this is not entirely true. The stock market triggered a recession, but the real cause of the Great Depression was that many banks had extended too many bad loans and were speculating too much. At this time, many US banks were small and independent shops that lent out a large amount of their assets to people for stock market speculation. As the stock market crashed, these banks went out of business overnight. There was no deposit insurance at the time, so if a local bank closed its doors, people lost their money. With headlines of many banks shutting down, people began to panic and pull their savings from healthy banks. This created bank runs on otherwise healthy banks that had to turn around and try to get all their customers' money all at once. This became a serious problem when in New York City, a false rumor started that the Bank of the United States refused to sell a man's stock. This was enough to cause over 25,000 people to crowd the bank, and by the end of the day, $3 million had been withdrawn from the bank. Fear was in the air, and worried of a larger bank run they couldn't handle, the Bank of the United States closed its doors and asked the state to take over the bank's assets. Soon after, the bank failed to get support for a short-term loan to stop the bank run and would ultimately close its doors for good. It accounted for a third of the total $550 million deposits lost in the Depression. This sent shockwaves across the banking industry, and many banks began to call in loans and sell assets in order to stay liquid. 1/3 of banks in America would ultimately fail in this time period.
Hey Joe, I just sold my car and have a few bucks now to pay you back. Which bank are you with again?
Are you crazy? Not a chance I'm leaving my money in any of those banks again.
With people choosing to hold their money outside of banks, the money supply in the US declined 31% from 1929 to 1933. And deflation has devastating effects on an economy. By causing the value of money to go up, it reduces consumers' willingness to spend money, discourages investment, and increases the burden for those in debt. All of this leads to wages and income falling. And through this all, the Federal Reserve stood back, allowing this money supply contraction and the banking failures to happen without any intervention. A crucial mistake that has been widely criticized for making the Depression much worse than it needed to be. Through all of this, US President Herbert Hoover had no idea how to fix this and would largely be blamed for the lasting duration of the Depression. Following the initial stock market crash, there was a growing sentiment for isolationist and protectionist policies. In 1930, he passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act to protect US farmers and other industries from foreign competitors. It increased tariffs on foreign imports to the US by about 20%, which then immediately led to 25 countries retaliating and putting their own tariffs on American goods. Global trade would plummet even further from this, declining 66% worldwide from 1929 to 1934. Global trade was a relatively small piece of the American economy at the time, but this policy only made things worse. In total, the Great Depression would last over 10 years and mark the worst economic downturn in the history of the modern world. The Dow Jones would fall 90% from its high in 1929, and many lost their jobs as companies shut down en masse. 9 million savings accounts were wiped out. Over 9,000 US banks had failed. Industry halted, and unemployment in the US reached 24.9%, its highest point in history. To make matters worse, there was a period of severe dust storms in the middle of the US that caused drought, high winds, and hurt many farms in what became known as the Dust Bowl, the worst man-made ecological disaster in American history. As farming in the US slowed down, and with 1/3 of Americans still in agriculture, this would have massive consequences. Homelessness and breadlines became a common sight. In America, there would be 34 million people without any income. Shantytowns began appearing across the country and got the nickname Hoovervilles after the now disgraced president.
Could it get any worse?
In 1932, the US elected President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who promised drastic changes and action to get the country out of the Depression. With the New Deal program, for helping the needy, he established a minimum wage, overtime pay, unemployment insurance, and a social security program.